Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar with Booz Allen Hamilton. We're delighted to welcome you to this important conversation we're about to have for the next 50 minutes about evolving threats of deepfakes and synthetic media and what it means for a number of agencies, including law enforcement, intelligence, and government operations. For the next 50 minutes or so, we'll explore all these topics. We'll understand how the deepfake technology has evolved across multiple different threat vectors, from fraud to disinformation to national security to evidence integrity. At the end of the session, we will save a few minutes for your questions, but please feel free to drop them into the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your webinar panel throughout the conversation, and we'll try our best to address them live at the end. And if we can't, we will be sending you a follow-up email to answer your questions. I'm Katie. I lead marketing programs here at Reality Defender, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by a distinguished panel of experts leading this conversation. So with that, Bob Ashley is here with us today. He is a career intelligence officer who spent over 35 years with the United States Army. He retired as a lieutenant general and served as the director of Defense Intelligence Agency. Bob also serves as the Reality Defender Federal Advisory Board member. Joining us from Booz Allen is Catherine Norton, Vice President of AI Rapid Prototyping. Catherine began her career in the intelligence community as well and holds a PhD in information systems focusing on multimodal generative algorithms. She now leads the Booz Allen's applied research across adversarial AI, computer vision, and generative AI for the intelligence community, border security, and military health. We also have Alex Lyle, our Chief Technology Officer at Reality Defender. He is a cybersecurity veteran with over 25 years of experience in addressing complex security challenges across multiple enterprise environments. Alex is also an ex-hacker and a red teaming expert. So before we get started, I wanted to give a quick note about who we are. Reality Defender is an award-winning cybersecurity company helping enterprises and governments detect deepfakes and AI-generated media. We work with trusted global partners and Fortune 500 institutions to deliver detection at scale and in real time through our API-first platform, which helps a variety of teams identify fraud, disinformation, and harmful deepfakes as they happen. So with that context in mind, I'll now hand it over to Lieutenant General Bob Ashley to begin our discussion.
All right, Katie, thanks. And thanks for everybody for dialing in, and specifically Alex and Catherine, our subject matter experts. We appreciate that. Katie laid out the threat vectors for you. Synthetic media is no longer a fringe concern. This is a mainstream issue. And it's important that you capture one of the words she said, cybersecurity. And Alex's background as a hacker. This is a cyber issue, and it touches every aspect of your life, and it's only going to get more prolific. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this into 4 segments. We're going to talk about macro trends. We're going to talk about threats that law enforcement and the government's facing. We'll do a little bit of a technical deep dive so you understand the nature of the threats and whether or not we're going to be able to keep pace with that. And then we'll talk some practical applications that you can employ in your businesses and really in your personal life as well, and how you think about this. Interspersed in there, we're going to give you 3 polling questions, and so those will pop up, and we'll ask you to vote on those rather quickly. But before we kick off, we're going to show you a really short video. And it is from a 2019 annual threats testimony. So the intelligence community senior leadership, what they do every year, they will go in front of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and they'll do annual threats. And so as we see, this is no longer a fringe issue. You can see this was a topic that came up in 2019. Now, as the camera goes from left to right on your screen, you're going to see the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, the CI Director, Gina Haspel. Then you'll hear from Dan Coates, who was the Director of National Intelligence in 2019. And then you'll see a younger version of me in uniform with less gray hair. But Katie, if you'd start the video, please.
We've talked about deepfakes a couple of different times today, but when you think about the catastrophic potential to public trust and to markets that could come from deepfake attacks, are we organized in a way that we could possibly respond fast enough to a catastrophic deepfakes attack?
We certainly recognize the threat of emerging technologies and the speed at which that threat increases. We clearly need to be more agile. We need to partner with our private sector. We need to resource our activities relative to dealing with these known technologies and unknown technologies, which we know are going to appear anytime soon because it's just a very quickly evolving. And so we have a dedicated commitment to this transformation to, it's called IC 2025. What do we have to be in 2025, but not let alone 2019 and 2020? And we are using that throughout all 17 agencies in terms of how we have to adapt to that. And that's a major change that this IC has to go through, but we're fully intent on making it happen.
I hear that, and I've been reading Intel Daily now for 18 months, and the pace of upgraded game on the part of the community is a real testament to all of your leadership, but I still think the asymmetric exposure we have, where the barrier to entry for deepfakes technology is so low now, lots of entities short of nation-state actors are going to be able to produce this material and again destabilize not just American public trust, but markets very rapidly.
If I could real quick, just go back to our opening question from the chairman where he said, are you concerned about our protection of data? So how do you get deep fakes that are really, really good? Lots of data. That's how you train your algorithms. So it goes back to kind of where we started, the ability to protect that information, to preclude the training of those algorithms to a degree where you cannot tell the difference. And again, our challenge is, how do you build the algorithm to identify the anomaly? Because every deepfake has a flaw. At least now they do.
Thanks, General.
We'll start with the question. So, and I kind of closed that with everyone has a flaw. Okay, that was 6 years ago. And so now the technologies are getting much more sophisticated. So let me go to Alex first. Where are synthetic media threats showing up most often today? And, really kind of the domestic and the international threats.
It's an interesting question. So if you asked me about a year ago, when you talk about deepfakes, you're talking about more sort of like almost a science experiment where they were not an everyday occurrence. They weren't exactly part of the everyday cyber criminal sort of playbook. In the last year, particularly, you've now seen that just not be the case, right? This is now part of a cyber criminal's attack vector. Social engineering has always been one of the most successful attack vectors that a cyber criminal has. I mean, think about what's the most famous hacker was probably Kevin Mitnick. He was fantastic at social engineering. Now you couple that with the fact that with commoditized hardware, a gaming laptop and some open source software, you now have an incredible leveraging tool for those sorts of attack vectors. So when you start thinking about east-west migration, data exfiltration, things along those lines, you are seeing increasingly sort of like the deep fakes being put in that platform. The other side of things as well is you're seeing a lot of things around synthetic and AI manipulation coupling with LLMs that allow you to do sort of large-scale automated social engineering attacks, both from voice side of things and even some of the newer ones we're seeing on the Zoom side of things, where you're just looking to sort of, just like you would with a phishing attack, but with this case, leveraging voice and video audio. So we're definitely seeing it transition from an exception to a norm. In fact, I was talking to one customer yesterday. They hire around 10,000 people a year. They did a case study and found that 6,000 hiring interviews that were done on Zoom were actually deepfakes, which was an incredibly staggering number. Now, they're in an industry which obviously sees a lot of attacks because the industry they're in, but that sort of tells you that this is no longer sort of like, hey, an interesting science experiment that you hope don't get dinged on, to an everyday occurrence you're seeing in the market, and definitely part of the cyber criminal sort of like everyday playbook, right? So.
Yeah. So Alex, thanks for that. So Catherine, my closing comment on the testimony was indicative of the level of sophistication that existed then. So kind of take us through that journey. How have the threats changed from the early deepfakes, and how has that matured? And then I want to
Yeah,
come back to Alex also and ask both of you guys to comment on, make sure that the audience understands when you say social engineering, what you're talking about. But let's talk about the evolution, Catherine.
yeah, definitely. So, this is something that is pretty like academically personal for me because when I started my dissertation, a lot of my work was in a field called image to image translation using generative adversarial networks and then DDPMs, which are diffusion models. Now, I defended my dissertation right when ChatGPT came out in November 2022. And at that time, because I noticed in the video, Mr. Ashley, it was 2019. Back then, we had algorithms like called VQGAN CLIP. Some of you might know CLIP. CLIP is like a very important text image embedding model that's used everywhere. It's used in all sorts of AI art models right now. But the state of the art was like, if you've ever seen this very famous Will Smith meme, like of eating spaghetti, and you can see 20 fingers and it's very, very blurry. It's a horrible set of resolution. Now, fast forward, now we have things like VO3 and Nano Banana, and we've got different kind of what I would say older methods that have now been integrated into modern ways. Alex had talked about, for example, the ability to get cheaper accelerated compute. Nowadays, you can buy an RTX 2080 GPUs that I had to buy back in the day for $1,200. You can get them for 400 bucks now. And granted, there's a limited amount of compute on it, but it is still enough to run some basic diffusion models. So not only has like the nature of the architecture of many of these deep learning models changed to be more performant and handling, as Alex had alluded to, not only imagery, but also video and motion and audio to make it very multimodal. The architecture has changed, the deep learning algorithm has changed, but also now we've got the ability to use old kind of image processing, basic signal processing methods and combining them in very powerful ways because we have the computational architecture. We've got the computational power and juice to be able to, as you had said, Bob, take a lot of data and learn upon it and generate a lot of very, very unscrupulous, easy to deceive kind of patterns.
Yeah, so as you get it more sophisticated, and they said, the bar is low, that it makes it very easy for anybody sitting in their basement to use these tools and come up with some very sophisticated things. But Alex, let me get back to your comment on social engineering. Can you just define that for the audience?
So, I mean, in a slightly unpleasant way, social engineering is convincing someone to do something that they really shouldn't do. That's eventually what it is, right? And it's typical. It's typically the most successful security sort of like attack vector that there's been, right? People have access to things that you want to have access to. All you need to do is convince them to do something or click on something or give some piece of information that they shouldn't do to get access to it. That's what social engineering is. And so here's the rub. We have been taught from probably my kids' generation on, but I am older and slightly crusty. And so when we've been taught from the get-go that seeing and believing it, you trust what you see and you trust what you hear, to the point that our court systems are based on this, like tape confessions, videotaped evidence. These things are ingrained in us to trust what we see. And so when you think about what deepfakes are, when someone calls you from a number that you know and sounds like the person that you know from that number, you inherently have a trust of that person. It's not a bad thing. That's the society to which we lived in up to about 3 years ago. That was how things worked. And so now, with social engineering, which is, being very convincing to convince someone that to do something they shouldn't do, and you're coming from and you're convincing that person that you are that person, a person that they trust to do it, that bar is significantly lowered. And it's very hard to train people to stop and think, um, before they do those actions. And now it's hard to do that before you sounded like, that person or looked like that person. It's even harder now. And that's sort of like where we're seeing, increasing attack vectors. And we also see, because of that, a shift in the paradigm of those attack vectors as well, where, VoIP systems, VMB systems, PBX systems are now much more ripe to be attacked. Why? Because I can leverage that to make an internal phone call to be that person you want to be. It's very difficult to sort of stop yourself and think, is this really the person I'm meant to be talking to? Now, if
Yeah.
they're asking for $20 million, maybe you would. But if they're saying, hey, I'm locked out of my laptop, could you reset the password for me? Or, hey, could you call so-and-so? Or could you remind me this meeting? Or could you give me access? Those sorts of everyday trivial things that your colleagues ask you all the time that you wouldn't even remember at the end of the day. Those are incredibly important attack vectors. And when you talk about east-west migration, it even becomes more
Yeah.
compounded now when you think about the decentralized network of post-COVID. Everyone's
Yep.
working on their own laptops. These things become more and more prevalent. So,
Yep, Alex, thanks for that. So what I'm going to ask Katie to do real quick is, so we said we had 3 polling questions for you. Katie, can you bring up the first polling question? And we're going to give you about 20 seconds to vote. And then I'm going to go to Catherine, and we're going to go into the second theme, because Alex is kind of leading us into that on the discussions about law enforcement. So if you would, we're going to put this up for about 20 seconds. And while you're getting ready to vote, I am going to move into the next section with Catherine. And so this one really is, and Alex kind of started to preview this, is the prevalence of this in law enforcement. But it's also challenges to the government, and both Alex and Catherine have a background having touched the intelligence community. So Catherine, talk about what this makes this really difficult, and then how this touches law enforcement, finance, government, and even your experience in the intelligence community.
Yeah, yeah. I started my career many moons ago in the intelligence community, and I was really working on the human side. And nowadays I get the wonderful opportunity to work with other agencies and law enforcement agencies and border security as well. And I would say that many of their problems are quite similar, but it's not exactly as we might believe the challenges to be. I think for anyone who's worked with these governments for a long enough time, you'll see that there's essentially 3 kind of like unique challenges. Number 1 is obviously the pace of technology. That's clearly one of the key issues. We already discussed that, and Alex alluded to it as well. People often think deepfakes are pictures or images or video, and it's really not. It's completely multimodal. And something that Alex is alluding to is, we live now in a digital environment where you really can't trust everything. Many things are completely AI generated. There's like a new AI actress, Tilly Norwood, completely AI generated. So it's not science fiction anymore in terms of Blade Runner or Her or Space Odyssey. These are real entities, and I foresee a future where we will have AI generated entities that we interact with very, very frequently. So naturally, there's a technology issue, the algorithmic side. Number 2, there's also, funny enough, if you remember, like the big data kind of paradigm from many, many years ago, these agencies, they deal with a speed, volume, and veracity problem. It is back again. And that is a constant stream of information. Much of it is noise that government agencies must be able to detangle. It's not just like, oh, here's a picture on X. Is it fake or not? That's the easy classification problem. They're dealing with constant surge of information, and they have to quickly be able to determine at a moment's notice what kind of threat this invokes. It's not only a matter of is it a deep fake or not, it's what is the nature and characterization of the threat. And then I think the third leg of this is, believe it or not, in government agencies, as advanced as many of them are, there is still a legacy IT enterprise infrastructure. Many of them have definitely upgraded to a variety of different cloud platforms. But when we talk about cybersecurity and integrating these tools, which change, these algorithms change constantly. Hundreds of papers are published every single week up on archive. dealing with types of threats like this, it's very hard to integrate the most state-of-the-art solution within enterprise, very large, complex enterprise workflows. So I think, it's not only a matter of figuring out if this new video is fake or not, it is how do we efficiently integrate it into our government work stream to handle these very complex and demanding intelligence and law enforcement threats.
Yeah. So Alex, any follow up on that? Because I'm going to jump here in a second to the second polling question, because I really want to get into the technology itself.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that we haven't really hit on is the international piece of this. So you talk about social engineering is really trying to get somebody to think in a certain way. In Russian doctrine, Soviet doctrine, there's a thing called reflexive control. In other words, it is to influence you in a direction for you to make a decision that is the outcome they desire. And so from a disinformation standpoint, nations do this. That is a threat vector where they provide information that is false to try to drive you toward a decision or action. But Alex, any follow up on the second theme area before we jump into really kind of the technology piece?
I want to touch on something that Catherine said, which is like, look, AI changes the world in a day. I get that, but the world doesn't change in a day, right? And so what you have this issue is now you have a blue ocean attack vector, which in cybersecurity doesn't actually happen that often. I mean, you talk about ransomware being one of them. Definitely ransomware and OT was an attack vector that no one really thought about and then suddenly became a thing. But since then, this has really been the next big sort of like blue ocean. And you need to find a way. Tech stacks can't adapt to the new threat. It takes too long to do it. Now, in 20 years' time, 15 years' time, absolutely. But, there are agencies that are running, there are banks that are running COBOL. Code has not been changed since the 1970s, right? I mean, this is this tech stacks that we're talking about. And so whenever you think about a solution, you have to fit into the paradigm of these tech stacks, being flexible on that side of things. You can't just change the whole world on a dime. It just doesn't work like that. And so a flexibility and an understanding has to happen. And that's probably one of the biggest sort of like challenges, especially when there are still, cloud is still relatively new and it's been around for a while now, guys, right? And so now you're thinking about a totally new blue ocean attack vector you have to come with solutions that are inflexible and deal with the now, not the ideal state. So
I'm going to ask Alex and Catherine both on the technology evolution. Do you anticipate that deepfakes will hit a point, multimodal, right? Whether it's image, audio, or video, that we can no longer apply tools to discern if it's fake? And let me ask Catherine first.
This is a very great question. I think this is an area that's like very fascinating for me, mainly because in my dissertation, I was really interested in facial emotion recognition, which is a it's an old area of study in affective computing. But the twist on it is to use, and there's a reason I'm saying all this, is to use long wave infrared or thermal imagery, because with long wave infrared, you can see a lot of patterns that visible light just can't capture. So like if you're blushing, your blood vessels will innervate and you actually see the heat radiating from your face, and you can't see that easily in visible light. My point for this little story is that there's a lot of technologies out there, old ones that are perfectly good enough, kind of Alex was saying, good enough to fool enough people, like face to face and face swap and face morphing, even old techniques like Poisson blending, which is like quite old. These are good enough. But I think when you take it to the next level that people kind of get filled with like existential dread is the integration of human qualities, human markers. Essentially, kind of what I was mentioning about facial thermal or facial emotion recognition is that in the past, there have been a lot of studies about including, for example, the detection of motion vectors, which is like very exaggerated forms of like heart breathing, babies breathing, for example. Or, we used to call it like sonography, particular soft biometrics about your wrist and different vessels underneath it. But there are human-like qualities about breathing, about corneal speculation, about your iris dilation, where there are algorithms and approaches to like use attention maps to be able to identify, this is kind of anomalous. A human does not breathe at this particular frequency in hertz. This is a generated hertz frequency, and so this must not be a human because people don't breathe at that rate. So there are things like that that I guess I would say that the typical kind of cyber criminal that Alex is talking about may not be so interested in things that are like physiologically exact. But I think at the pace that we are going, there will always be flaws, because you had mentioned it before, Bob. There will always be flaws, but they will be less perceptible to the human eye and will require another AI to be able to evaluate them. And I guess like another point there, and I was going to weigh in on one of Alex's great thoughts, is I do think that there poses like another landscape, a very interesting threat, which is nowadays, we are doing more agentic AI, right? We've got different tooling, different tools that reach out to the internet for different APIs, databases, what have you, different tools that do different functions. And there is a whole discussion about the security of different agentic systems, but I don't think it would be hard pressed to believe that the ability to fetch a variety of different data in real time and being able to augment some of these existing deepfake algorithms would be that far off. I think that is something that, given time, there will be automation of that to make the attacker or the adversary's job that far easier. So sorry, that was a little bit off the side, but
No,
I
no, it's
want to add
no, it's
that.
good. I mean, you gave a good sense of the level of complexity of what the
Yes.
tools are doing. As I got ready for that testimony in 2019, the example that I was given from, the analyst was blinking at that point was not consistent with what normal blinking was. So maybe it's the hertz, the pattern, something like that. But Alex, your thought, can the tools get to the point where we can't figure them out?
So I'm going to put a dichotomy in this. And so if you're asking me if a nation state can build a foundational model that can do real-time deepfakes that's unperceptible to the latest tools, absolutely, given enough computing power and the vast quantities of data that's required. I mean, and it is a staggeringly large amount of both. Let's just get it straight right now. This is outside the remit of cyber criminals. That would be nation states. And to be honest with you, there's probably only two nation states that could do it. One of them is the United States. The other one's probably China. And even China, I would debate. Cyber criminals do not have access to that type of foundational models. The truth is, foundational models that all these platforms are leveraging foundational models made for commercial purposes, or OSS models, essentially. OSS models that were made, and this is where the dichotomy is. So they are not designed to commit fraud. Foundational models are designed to make something that is passable to the human eye, right? That's what they're designed for. That's different from making something that can pass a rigorous track. And the reason for that is they get judged on a fitness function that's for that, which does this look real to me? And so there are characteristics which aren't physiological, but around things around entropy, around how these models are built, particularly when you talk about anything that's generated by a computer. When you think about non-uniform entropy, it's extraordinarily difficult to do. You don't have models that are built around that because humans don't detect that, right? They used to, you used to look at that kind of weird thing where you're looking, going, is this real or not? It's kind of smooth. It's kind of like that lack of uniformity, almost to perfection type thing. But there are inherent signals in OSS and commercial foundational models that you can pick up on, and I think they'll be there for a while, which cyber criminals cannot get rid of, because those models they don't help you make a more convincing movie. They don't help you make a more convincing advertisement, right? So they are not trained for that. And so I think there are things that are non-behavior, that's nothing to do with the human physical characteristics, let's call it that, which you can pick up on the generation of a picture of a whole, that I think will be there for a long time. And then the other side of things is there is a world of difference between asynchronous and synchronous video. Asynchronous video is incredibly expensive, but can be incredibly convincing. You see Sora 2, you see VO, so and so. We are far from being able to do that sort of thing in a real-time manner, right? So I think there is a while to go on that side of things. I think there is still a good while on that, as long as you discount state actors. But then again, in cybersecurity, if a state actor really wants to hack you, they usually find a way. So it's not like, like we are talking about a realm that's above what we are talking about from a criminal side, cyber criminal space. So
Yeah, so this is a tough one, and after I ask this, I'm going to ask Katie to put up the third polling question, but for just a second, because you guys have thrown out some examples, some technical details that a layman is not necessarily going to understand, and these are tools that so many businesses need, but they won't understand that. So if I'm an agency and I'm trying to figure out how to evaluate these tools, coach me a little bit on that, from a layman's standpoint, just so when somebody comes in with some great marketing and I go, yeah, let me push the yes button, I believe, and I contract with them. So Catherine, if I'm evaluating tools, give me a couple basic things I should be looking for or asking about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think there's a couple of criteria that, from like a layman's perspective, are important. I think number one, it kind of comes down to this is a classification problem, meaning that we're either going to have an AI model that will predict a number, which would be a regression problem, or we're predicting an outcome, which would be a classification problem. So at the most simplest, it's more complicated than that. The simplest, most basic level, when there is deepfake detection and someone is telling you we have a deepfake detection algorithm, at the most minimal thing, it needs to give you the probabilities to output whether it is fake or not fake at the end of the day. So that's number one thing. Now, there are a variety of different statistics. There are hundreds in the machine learning and deep learning realm that will help you better understand, as Alex alluded to, fitness score per se, to understand beyond just is it 90% fake and 10% real. There are many other types of metrics that will help you decompose the rigor of that model's performance. And some of those rely on precision. Other words will be recall. There will be other words called F1. Sometimes if it is multiple categories of things that they want to predict, they'll give you a full classification on matrix. That being said, there are so many older deepfake detection models. Alex had mentioned them. He talked about open source ones and then foundational ones. Each one has their own kind of different performance metrics because they were all trained on a particular set of training data. So as a result, some of the biggest challenges are, and this is not just in deepfake detection, this is just writ large, all AI, is going from a model that was trained in a closed laboratory setting on very pristine training data, and then seeing how well it actually works, in the field, in the test, on wild data. So one area is, yes, to evaluate it. You can't just take in one metric, one probability. You have to understand the whole gamut of different types of performance metrics. But then beyond just how well the algorithm performs, like I was mentioning earlier about you have a tech stack, as Alex was saying, you have enterprise tools. Sometimes you don't need that extra, like we're going from 95 to 97. You don't need those extra 2 basis points. For basic tasks, 95% is enough. So as a result, if you're going to squeeze out the extra 2 points, that might mean, oh, you need to spin up another GPU instance for another GPU card to pay more. Is it really necessary? So there are some trade-offs in your evaluation strategy about what is the best path for you to give you just enough information that it will be sufficient for a decision. And then I think the third thing is It is very, very, very important to realize there is no algorithm on Earth that is 100% accurate. Might be 99.99, but there's nothing 100% accurate. So as a result, because this is pertaining to a lot of generative AI models, I think it's important when you evaluate these that you realize that there is going to be a trade-off space where there will be something that will be classified incorrectly. So for example, let's say you have it's called 80% precision. That would mean that 20% is incorrectly classified. And then if you like break that down even more, that's like saying, for every like 10 pieces of images or video, 2 were not deepfakes. So like 8 were and 2 weren't. That's almost like a false accusation rate of like 1 in 5. And so that is kind of to give you a sense that there are lots of different design and strategic and workflow trade-offs that have to be considered when you're adopting these models. So it's more than just, hey, this is 95% accurate. That's not sufficient.
Yeah, let me ask Katie to put up the third polling question real quick and just take a second there because I'm going to jump into the last area so we can get a little bit of time for our audience to ask questions. So please take a look at the polling question number 3 and cast your vote. So the last thematic area is practical applications and the future outlook. So let me go to Alex first. If you were advertising an agency leader and there was one step that they could start with, right? What's the first thing they should be thinking about on their journey to securing their business? Because like we said before, this is, at its foundations, this is a cyber threat. But, and then your background. So, if I'm a corporate 100, 500, and I'm trying to secure my business, where do I start?
I think you have to start with playbooks. I always think that there's a difference between like running a pilot and productizing a security tool, right? I mean, there's a massive difference between the two. And you have to look at your playbooks and you have to understand there are aspects around this that are not traditionally what you would do for a cybersecurity instance. For one of them is repudiation, which is something that we don't really talk about in cybersecurity. But, there are people who could falsely say that this is a deep fake because they regret what they did, right? And things along those lines. So understanding that and understanding what you're going to start having to keep to understand your incident analysis. And then understanding, like I can do the pitch for Reality Defender. The whole point of that is how do you productionize deepfake analysis? Well, use Reality Defender, right? That's our pitch. But the whole idea there is like, how do you incorporate this into your cybersecurity stack? And then the other part of it as well is understanding the repudiation part of that playbook. And then finally, and this is the other part, which is, there's incident analysis, which, if you're a cybersecurity veteran and I told you that and you told me your detection rate of 16%, that's actually pretty good, right? The problem with deepfake analysis is the immediacy of the attack, right? This isn't someone doing east-west data migration, east-west sort of like infiltration, and then they're there and then they're looking around and then they have to find a way of exfiltrating data and things along those lines. No, this is an immediacy attack. So then part of the playbooks is telling the person that they are attacking as soon as possible that you are being actively attacked and don't do anything silly. Right. And so there are aspects around your playbooks that you have to think through that aren't part of the traditional cybersecurity attack vectors. And so that's where I would sort of start the planning side of things. And then understanding your sort of attack posture, understanding where your data points are. I mean, you think very much about your emails, but you probably haven't thought about your phone vector for a while, your VoIP for a while, definitely. Right? And you haven't really thought about your Teams integration, and you're probably not even thinking about messages that come in with video and audio. So all these sorts of areas is like understanding your inputs and outputs as the company organization as a whole and building a strategy around that is where I would look at as a CISO, right? And build it with the idea of it not being a science experiment, build it with the idea of being, how do I productionize this into my environment in a meaningful manner? So those are sort of like the key points that I would point to first as you start going down that journey.
Thanks. Catherine, anything you would add to where somebody should start?
I mean, I think some of the points brought up earlier about having that playbook and also having some practicality in terms of it. I think Alex brings up a really strong point before about, this is ever increasing technology, but the tech stack is often missing or the tech stack is not keeping up. But at the same time, one should not be forced to reconstruct their entire cyber and IT investment just to shepherd in a new tool. Um, I know like from working with Reality Defender that one of the reasons I think it's very helpful on their side is because everything that they're building is completely back end. So the ability to integrate some of their applications is all like via API call. That makes it a lot more uh, easier to integrate than like saying, take this humongous, like clunky piece of software and try to ATO it. It's a different kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the questions I had was how easily can detection tools fit into the system, the agencies have in place? So you have to have APIs. It can't be this big clunky thing that gets integrated. So
Has to live
um,
where the cybersecurity analyst list
Yeah,
lives. Right?
exactly.
yeah,
If you're sending results to somewhere else, it is not a usable tool. These guys have a workflow, and the tools have to fit into that workflow. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble, just the way it is.
so you may both know the answer to this. I'll start with Alex, but this is coming in from Nicholas. And you have to tell them what Sora 2 is because I don't know. But the question is, what do you think it means for the industry that Reality Defender was able to bypass Sora 2 identity safeguards? And so tell them what Sora 2 is, and then what's the
Sora 2 is
implications
a
in that?
new generative model that came out of OpenAI. And so look, provenance, what we call provenance and context. So Reality Defender is what's called a provenance-free and a context-free platform. And what that means is effectively provenance is when you are looking for deep watermarks, signatures around things, right? And that's what Sora 2 uses. It has a way of more watermarking things. The problem with that is they're watermarking artifacts that have been generated that are leveraged on players that use those as options. And so you can't use that as a trust model. I don't have a problem with provenance, but you can't trust provenance because anything that's provenance based, particularly when it comes to signature based, look, I've been a cybersecurity guy for a while. Anything that relies on keeping keys and signatures has broken fundamentally. It has always broken. You look at companies like Microsoft and Sony with their PlayStation and their Xboxes, where the whole key to their kingdom is keeping keys secret. And they've failed every time. And so the idea that something signed is going to help you is a fundamental issue I have from a cybersecurity perspective. Maybe in 20 years' time, maybe, but you're talking about a stack that has to do it from end to end. And the problem is once you start defining a stack that has certain trust boundaries, but other parts of it don't, you have these problems come up. And that type of problem that you saw will be endemic for a very long time. You can try and convince me at some point it won't be a problem. I struggle to believe you. To be honest with you, just cybersecurity has taught me for a long time that keys do not make things secure. I wish they were so, but wishing doesn't make it so, as my mother used to say, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, or former chief of staff of the Army would always say, hope is not a method. Catherine, I'm going to give this one to you. We're down to our last couple of minutes, and I'm going to go back to Katie after this one. So Elsa has a very interesting question. We've talked about all the technical pieces of this over the course of nearly the last 50 minutes, and here's Elsa's question. We can fight deepfakes, image, audio, video with technology and combine that with essential human practices. So from a human practices standpoint, what suggestions do you have on the human side? Because, you know, it's really kind of funny when we talk about phishing. What's the weakest link? It's the person that clicked on the hypertext and gave the keys to the kingdom away. So as we think about multimodal, deep fakes, what's the human piece of this that you know, leaders should be thinking about, and you know, everybody from business to their daily lives?
Yeah, I mean, I probably approach this with a little bit of dystopia, but I think it's essentially trust, right? I think that the human component of this is measured trust. That digital content is not something that at first glance, in my personal opinion, you should immediately trust it for all the reasons that also Alex had mentioned. I think it's one thing to go on TikTok, for example, and use a filter that can turn you into an anime character. That's one thing. There's obviously entertainment value for using generative AI. That's indisputable. There's a lot of entertainment and, you know, efficiency from using generative AI in different kinds of ways. I think what Alex was teeing up earlier on the human side is that when there is now an ask associated with said media, an unnatural, suspicious kind of ask, that is when like your, you know, human spidey senses should definitely go up. So I mean, from the human perspective, yes, you can put an AI generated tag. You can put it in Instagram, you can put it in TikTok, Facebook, what have you. But it kind of goes back to what Alex had just mentioned earlier. Tagging, keys, these kinds of things are somewhat superficial, and especially for AI tagging, that's voluntary. That's not a requirement. Until there comes a day where, you know, from the actual chip side, from the actual GPU chip, that there is some kind of embedded hash, then it will be very difficult to evaluate with a machine whether this media is synthetic or not. So from a human standpoint, I think that when it comes to the interaction of your content, whether it's you in a meeting or an interview, and I will tell you that on interviews that I've interviewed people, I have had a deepfake. It was a very bad one, but I have had that happen to me, and I was actually very shocked. So when it's a matter of your interaction with a digital human entity, which sounds very science fiction, I would say to take it with some measured trust and to not exactly rely on voluntary tagging and information that has been presented to you. I have a teenager, and it's interesting when you learn from younger generation, they are already inherently distrustful of media, and they think it's ridiculous how an older generation accepts digital content as automatically real. So I think we're getting to this like inflection point where it is just unfortunately a new kind of programming for people to believe that what they see on the internet is not always true. So I don't know if that helps to answer Elsa's question.
No, it does. And so it's good to know that there's the younger generation is suspect, so that's good. But and I assume that you didn't hire the deepfake on the interview. But
I mean,
for
honestly,
Catherine and
if he made a good deepfake, would you have hired him?
I know, right? It was
Yeah, I was
so
gonna say it's like
yeah.
against you, it's like you could have tried a bit harder at least.
yeah, well, technically you
It was
didn't
so
have to pay him a salary either. Alex and Catherine, awesome. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. This was a lot of fun for me personally as well too. Even get to see myself what I looked like 6 years ago with less gray hair and more of it. Katie, back to you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Alex and Catherine, for your time and this amazing discussion we had. Speaking of meeting interview deepfakes, we've recently done a similar content where I've actually deepfaked our head of AI into Superman, and showed actually just how easy it is to use a video conferencing tool to deepfake yourself to get into an interview situation. So if you haven't seen our content or don't follow us, be sure to check out our LinkedIn page, go to realitydefender.com, look under our blogs and content.